My phone buzzed at 3 in the morning. Dad's text was ice cold. We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away from our family business and property. You're no longer welcome. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. After everything I'd sacrificed for our family company, after working endless hours while my brother partied through college, this was my reward. But as I scrolled up through our message history, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The previous text I'd sent him had never been delivered. Someone else was using his phone. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this shocking family betrayal story, I'm curious. Where are you watching from tonight? If this opening already has your heart racing like mine was, smash that like button because this story gets absolutely wild. And definitely subscribe because you won't believe the revenge plot that unfolds. Trust me, justice will be served in the most satisfying way possible. Now let me tell you what happened next, because that fake message was just the beginning of uncovering the biggest family conspiracy I never saw coming. My name is Evangeline, and I thought I knew my family. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I was the responsible daughter who helped Dad build his construction company from the ground up. While my younger brother Marcus spent his 20s traveling Europe on the family dime, I worked 16-hour days, learned every aspect of the business, and earned my MBA at night. Dad always promised the company would be mine someday, since Marcus showed zero interest in anything involving actual work. That's why the 3 a.m. text felt like a knife to my chest. But something about it nagged at me. Dad never used formal language like sever all contact. He was more likely to say, cut ties, or just stay away. And why would he text instead of calling? Despite our recent arguments about Marcus's excessive spending, Dad had never been cruel. I called him immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried Mom next. Same thing. Then I remembered Dad's habit of leaving his phone in the kitchen while he slept. Someone could have easily accessed it. The next morning, I drove to the family home where I'd lived until 6 months ago when I'd finally moved into my own apartment. Mom answered the door looking genuinely surprised to see me. Evangeline, honey, why didn't you call first? She asked, hugging me tightly. Did you and Dad decide to cut me out of the family? I asked directly. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? Cut you out? We would never... Check Dad's phone, I said, showing her the screenshot of his text. Mom's hands shook as she read it. This isn't from your father. He can barely send texts without help, and look at this spelling. Everything's perfect. Plus, we went to bed early last night and neither of us touched our phones. We found Dad in his workshop completely unaware that any message had been sent from his device. When we showed him the text, his face turned red with anger. I didn't send this garbage, he said firmly. Someone's playing games with our family. That's when Marcus walked in, and I watched his face carefully as we explained the situation. For just a split second, I caught a flicker of panic in his eyes before he composed himself. That's crazy, Marcus said, but his voice was too casual. Who would do something like that? Someone who wants to drive a wedge between me and the family, I replied, still watching him. Someone who benefits from me being cut out. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. Marcus had been spending more time at the office lately, which was completely out of character. He claimed he was finally getting serious about the business, but whenever I stopped by, I found him rifling through filing cabinets instead of actually working. I also noticed that Dad had been signing a lot of papers recently, documents that Marcus brought to him at home instead of handling them at the office like we normally did. When I asked Dad about it, he seemed confused about the details. Marcus said these were routine insurance forms and tax documents, Dad explained. He's been so helpful lately taking care of the paperwork so I don't have to worry about it. My stomach dropped. Dad was trusting and had never been detail-oriented with administrative tasks. If Marcus was manipulating him into signing documents without proper review, there was no telling what kind of damage he could cause. I decided to do some investigating on my own, using my key to the office, which thankfully Marcus hadn't thought to revoke. I arrived early one Saturday morning to go through recent financial records. What I found made me sick. Over the past 3 months, there had been numerous transfers from the company's main account to a new account I'd never seen before. The amounts weren't huge individually, a few thousand here and there, but they added up to over $50,000. More disturbing was that Dad's signature was on all the authorization forms, but I recognized Marcus's handwriting on several of the documents. I photographed everything and started tracing the mysterious account. It belonged to something called Heritage Development Solutions, but when I looked up the business registration, the address was a post office box, and the owner was listed as M. Whitmore, Marcus's full name. My brother wasn't just stealing from the family company, he was setting up his own competing business using our money. And based on the client list I found in his desk drawer, he was planning to take several of our biggest contracts with him when he left. The fake text message wasn't random cruelty. It was part of a calculated plan to push me out so he could take over everything Dad and I had built. Marcus knew that if I discovered his embezzlement, I'd have enough evidence to send him to prison. By making our parents think I'd chosen to cut contact, he was trying to gasoline the relationship while he finished looting the company. But Marcus had made one critical mistake. He didn't know that I'd been secretly documenting everything unusual about the business for months, sensing something was wrong even before I could pinpoint what it was. I had backup files, financial records, and now proof of his fraud. The question was, how many other family members were involved, and how deep did this betrayal go? I spent the entire weekend gathering evidence and planning my approach. Marcus had underestimated me, assuming I'd simply accept the fake text and disappear quietly from the family. Instead, I now had documentation of systematic embezzlement, forged signatures, and a competing business built with stolen assets. Monday morning, I called a family meeting under the pretense of clearing the air about the misunderstanding. I asked everyone to meet at the office conference room, Mom, Dad, Marcus, and surprisingly, Uncle Robert, who Marcus had specifically requested attend. That detail immediately raised red flags since Uncle Robert rarely involved himself in company matters. I arrived early and set up my laptop with all the evidence organized into clear folders. When everyone gathered, the tension was thick. Marcus looked confident, probably thinking this meeting would result in my final removal from the family business. Before we discussed the text message incident, I began calmly. I think we need to address some irregularities I've discovered in our company finances. Marcus's confidence faltered slightly. Evangeline, this really isn't the time for... Actually, it's exactly the time, I interrupted, projecting the first document onto the conference room screen. Dad, do you remember signing this authorization for a $53,000 transfer to Heritage Development Solutions? Dad squinted at the screen, then looked genuinely confused. I don't recall that company name at all. What was this transfer for? I clicked to the next slide showing the business registration for Heritage Development Solutions. It's Marcus's company. He registered it 2 months ago using money transferred from our accounts. The silence was deafening. Mom gasped audibly while Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. But Marcus surprised me by not denying it immediately. Okay, fine, Marcus said, his voice taking on a defensive tone. Yes, I started my own company, but I was planning to tell everyone once I got established. The transfers were loans that I intended to pay back with interest. Loans. I clicked through several more documents. Loans require paperwork, Marcus. These are unauthorized transfers using forged authorizations of Dad's signature. That's not borrowing. That's embezzlement. Dad studied the signatures more carefully, and his face grew darker with each document. Son, I never signed most of these. This isn't even close to my handwriting on half of them. I pulled out the client list I'd found in Marcus's desk. And here's the list of our top 5 clients that Marcus has been secretly negotiating with to move their contracts to his new company. Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Rodriguez, the Greenfield Shopping Center project. All of them have been contacted about switching to heritage development. Uncle Robert suddenly spoke up, and his words shocked everyone in the room. Evangeline, you need to stop this accusatory presentation right now. Marcus has been working hard to modernize this business, and these financial arrangements were discussed and approved at the ownership level. I stared at him. What ownership level? Dad owns 90% of the company, Mom owns 10%. When was this discussion? That's when Uncle Robert revealed something that changed everything. Actually, your father transferred 40% ownership to Marcus and me several months ago. We've been making executive decisions to position the company for growth and transition. Dad looked stunned. Robert, what are you talking about? I never transferred any ownership to anyone. Uncle Robert calmly pulled out a folder and placed documents on the table. These are the signed ownership transfer agreements witnessed and notarized. You signed them right here in this office. As Dad examined the papers, his face went white. These look like the insurance and tax documents Marcus brought me at home. He told me they were routine paperwork. The full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just Marcus stealing money. This was a coordinated effort between Marcus and Uncle Robert to take control of the entire company by tricking Dad into signing ownership transfers disguised as routine paperwork. You manipulated him into signing away his life's work? I said, my voice barely containing my rage. You used his trust and his confusion about legal documents to steal everything he built. Marcus finally showed his true colors. Dad's getting older, Evangeline. Someone needs to take control before he makes decisions that destroy what we've all worked for. You've been pushing him to expand too aggressively, taking on projects we can't handle. Robert and I are just protecting the family's interests. By committing fraud and theft, I shot back. By forging signatures and lying to him about what he was signing? Uncle Robert stood up, his demeanor turning cold. Evangeline, you're young and emotional. You don't understand business realities. Marcus and I have legal ownership now, and we're exercising our rights to protect our investment. If you can't accept the new structure, perhaps it's time for you to pursue other opportunities. That's when I played my final card. Actually, Robert, you might want to check Oregon state law regarding ownership transfers obtained through fraud and misrepresentation. Because I've already consulted with Morrison Hayes and Associates about this situation. The mention of the law firm that had handled our family's legal matters for decades sent visible shockwaves through the room. Morrison Hayes and Associates was prestigious, expensive, and known for thoroughly investigating fraud cases. You did what? Marcus demanded. I did exactly what any responsible business owner should do when they discover systematic embezzlement and fraudulent ownership transfers, I replied calmly. I documented everything and sought legal counsel. Sarah Hayes is very interested in this case, especially the forged signatures and the fact that Dad was deliberately misled about what he was signing. Mom, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up with steel in her voice. Evangeline is right. Robert Marcus, what you've done is criminal. You manipulated my husband, stole from our company, and tried to destroy our daughter's future. This ends now. The meeting exploded into accusations and threats. But I had achieved my primary goal. The truth was now completely exposed, and everyone knew exactly what Marcus and Uncle Robert had done. The question now was whether they would try to cover their tracks, double down on their theft, or attempt to frame me as the real problem. I was about to find out just how far they were willing to go to protect their fraudulent scheme. The confrontation in the conference room marked the beginning of an all-out family war. Marcus and Uncle Robert left the meeting making vague threats about protecting their legal interests, while Mom and Dad sat in stunned silence processing the magnitude of the betrayal. Over the next week, the situation escalated rapidly. Marcus hired his own attorney, David Kellerman, a lawyer known for aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. Kellerman immediately sent a cease and desist letter to our family demanding that we stop harassing his clients with false accusations and threatening to sue for defamation if we continued spreading lies about legitimate business transactions. But I wasn't backing down, and I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My first crucial ally emerged from an unexpected source, Janet Morrison from Morrison Hayes & Associates. Janet was Sarah Hayes' senior partner and had been practicing law for 30 years. When I showed her the complete evidence file, her reaction was immediate and decisive. "Evangeline, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder fraud and business embezzlement I've seen in years," Janet said during our first official consultation. "Your father was systematically deceived about the nature of legal documents, resulting in the transfer of hundreds of thousands of dollars in business assets. The fact that they tried to isolate you from the family suggests they knew you'd uncover their scheme." Janet agreed to represent our family on a contingency basis, meaning we wouldn't pay legal fees unless we won. More importantly, she immediately filed protective orders to freeze all assets in Heritage Development Solutions and requested an emergency audit of both companies' financial records. My second ally came from within the industry itself. Maria Rodriguez, owner of Rodriguez Construction and one of our biggest clients, called me directly after Marcus contacted her about switching contracts to his new company. "Evangeline, something felt very wrong about that conversation," Maria explained over coffee. "Marcus was pushing hard for a quick decision and offering pricing that seemed too good to be true. When I asked him about your role in the transition, he claimed you'd already left the family business voluntarily. But I've worked with you for 3 years, and I know how dedicated you are to your father's company." Maria not only refused to move her contracts to Heritage Development, but she also connected me with 2 other clients who had received similar approaches from Marcus. Together, they agreed to provide sworn statements about Marcus's deceptive tactics and false claims about my departure from the company. The third ally surprised everyone, Margaret Patterson, Uncle Robert's ex-wife. Margaret and Robert had divorced 5 years earlier after she discovered his affairs, but they'd maintained cordial relations for the sake of their adult children. When news of the ownership dispute became public within our professional network, Margaret reached out to me with disturbing information. "Evangeline Robert has been planning something like this for years," Margaret revealed during a private meeting at her home. "During our marriage, he constantly complained that your father didn't appreciate his contributions to the early success of the business. He felt entitled to ownership despite never actually investing any money or taking any real risks." Margaret had kept detailed financial records from their divorce, and those records showed that Robert had been living far beyond his means for years. He owed significant money to several creditors and had recently taken out a large personal loan using his anticipated inheritance from the family business as collateral. "He needed this ownership transfer to work," Margaret explained. "Without it, he was facing bankruptcy. That's probably why he recruited Marcus. Robert provided the legal strategy, and Marcus provided the access to your father's trust." Most importantly, Margaret still had copies of emails between Robert and Marcus that dated back 6 months before the ownership transfers began. The emails explicitly discussed removing Evangeline from the equation and convincing the old man to sign over control while he's still manageable. Armed with this new evidence, Janet filed additional criminal complaints for conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. The district attorney's office agreed to open an investigation, which meant Marcus and Robert were now facing potential felony charges, in addition to our civil lawsuit. But just as our case was gaining momentum, Marcus played a card that I hadn't anticipated. He scheduled a meeting with several of Dad's oldest friends and business associates, people who had known our family for decades. In that meeting, Marcus presented a carefully crafted narrative portraying himself as the responsible family member trying to save the business from my reckless expansion plans and Dad's declining mental capacity. Marcus showed them financial projections that painted my recent projects as dangerous overreach that threatened the company's stability. He claimed that the ownership transfer was actually Dad's idea, a way to ensure responsible management as he prepared for retirement. According to Marcus's version, I was the one acting irrationally by attacking family members with false accusations, rather than accepting the natural transition of leadership. The strategy was brilliant in its manipulation. These were people who genuinely cared about Dad and who had watched Marcus grow up. They wanted to believe that he was acting in the family's best interests rather than engaging in criminal fraud. Several of them called Dad directly expressing concern about the family conflict and suggesting that maybe it was time to let the younger generation take over. Even worse, Marcus had convinced two of Dad's most trusted friends, Bill Henderson and Tony Merrick, to serve as character witnesses for him. Both men were prepared to testify that Dad had seemed confused lately and that transferring ownership to Marcus appeared to be a reasonable precaution. The pressure on Dad was enormous. These were friendships that went back 40 years, and the suggestion that his own son was manipulating him was devastating. I watched my father age 10 years in 2 weeks, as he struggled with the possibility that people he trusted were either lying to him or being lied to themselves. That's when our fourth ally emerged, and this one was a game changer. Detective Lisa Park, from the Portland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Park had been investigating a series of elder fraud cases, and when Janet submitted our evidence, she immediately recognized patterns similar to other cases she'd worked. What makes this case particularly serious, Detective Park explained during our meeting, is the systematic nature of the deception and the significant dollar amounts involved. This isn't opportunistic theft. This is organized fraud that was planned and executed over several months. Detective Park's involvement lent official credibility to our accusations and put Marcus and Robert on the defensive. They could dismiss family drama and civil lawsuits, but criminal investigations were entirely different matters. However, just as I thought we were building an unshakable coalition, I received a phone call that changed everything. The call came from someone I'd trusted completely, someone who had been privy to our legal strategy and evidence gathering. The betrayal was about to come from within our own alliance, and it would nearly destroy everything we'd worked to build. The phone call came at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, just as our criminal case was gaining serious momentum. Detective Park had scheduled interviews with Marcus and Uncle Robert for the following week, and Janet felt confident that the district attorney would file formal charges within days. "Evangeline, we need to talk immediately," said the voice on the other end. It was Maria Rodriguez, one of my strongest allies, and the client who had first alerted me to Marcus's deceptive tactics, but something in her tone made my blood run cold. "What's wrong, Maria? Has something happened with your testimony?" "I can't give testimony anymore," she said quietly. "And I need you to understand why before you hear it from someone else." 20 minutes later, I met Maria at an all-night diner downtown, far from anywhere we might be recognized. What she told me shattered my faith in everything I thought I knew about loyalty and justice. "Marcus came to see me yesterday," Maria began, her hands shaking around her coffee cup. "But he didn't come alone. He brought David Kellerman and a private investigator who had been digging into my business finances." My stomach dropped. "What did they find?" 3 years ago, when my company was struggling, I made some decisions about tax reporting that were questionable. Nothing criminal, but definitely in a gray area that could be interpreted badly by the IRS. The private investigator found documentation of those decisions. I felt sick. "They're blackmailing you." "Kellerman was very clear about the consequences if I continued supporting your case. An IRS audit would destroy my business and my family's livelihood. My husband doesn't know about the tax issues, and if this comes out, it will ruin our marriage along with everything else." Maria's betrayal was devastating, but what she told me next was worse. Marcus and Kellerman weren't just targeting her. They were systematically investigating everyone in our alliance, looking for leverage to force them to withdraw support. "They know about Margaret Patterson's past drug treatment," Maria continued. "They found out that Detective Park's brother was arrested for fraud last year, which could be used to question her objectivity. And Evangeline, they have something on Janet Morrison, too." My heart pounded. What could they possibly have on Janet? She's one of the most ethical attorneys in the state. Her son was arrested for drunk driving 6 months ago. The case was handled very quietly and charges were reduced through plea bargaining. But if Kellerman makes it public, it could damage her reputation and affect her ability to represent clients in criminal cases. I realized that Marcus had learned something crucial from Uncle Robert's years of manipulation. Everyone has vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities can be weaponized if you're willing to be ruthless enough. Over the next 48 hours, the coalition I'd carefully built began crumbling. Margaret Patterson called to say she could no longer provide testimony due to personal reasons she couldn't discuss. Detective Park informed us that she was being reassigned to other cases due to potential conflicts of interest. Even Janet seemed shaken, though she insisted she wasn't withdrawing from our case. Marcus had effectively neutralized our strongest supporters without directly threatening them. He'd simply made the cost of supporting me too high for anyone to bear. The psychological warfare escalated when Marcus played his most devastating card. He scheduled a family dinner at Mom and Dad's house and invited me to attend so we can finally resolve this conflict like adults. I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't refuse without appearing unreasonable. When I arrived, I found not just Marcus and Uncle Robert, but also Bill Henderson and Tony Merrick, Dad's longtime friends who had been convinced that Marcus was acting in the family's best interests. "Evangeline," Marcus began with false sincerity, "I think we've all let emotions override common sense. This family conflict is tearing everyone apart, and it's not fair to Mom and Dad." He then presented what he called a reasonable compromise. I could remain involved in the business as an employee with a good salary. Marcus would become the official owner and president, and we would forget about the misunderstandings regarding the financial transfers. The money that went to Heritage Development has already been returned to the company accounts, Marcus claimed, showing bank statements. This was always intended as temporary financing, and now that it's been paid back, there's no reason for continued legal action. It was a masterful manipulation. To the older men present, it sounded like Marcus was being generous and responsible, but I recognized it for what it was, a final attempt to legitimize his theft by making it appear voluntary. "What about the forged signatures?" I asked. "What about the fact that Dad was deliberately deceived about what he was signing?" Uncle Robert smoothly answered. "Those were honest misunderstandings. Your father was busy, and sometimes explanations of complex legal documents weren't as detailed as they should have been. But the transfers were always discussed and approved in principle." Dad looked confused and exhausted. The weeks of conflict had taken a terrible toll on him, and I could see him wavering under the pressure from his oldest friends to accept Marcus's generous offer and restore family harmony. That's when Marcus delivered his knockout punch. "Evangeline, if you continue with these accusations and criminal complaints, you're going to destroy Dad's reputation in the business community. People are already whispering that he's losing his mental capacity and can't manage his own affairs. Is that really what you want his legacy to be?" The threat was clear: continue fighting, and they would systematically destroy Dad's reputation by portraying him as mentally incompetent. The very act of defending him would be used to humiliate him. I looked around the room at these men who claimed to care about my father while they collaborated in his destruction. Bill and Tony genuinely believed they were helping, but Marcus and Robert were coldly calculating the psychological pressure needed to force my surrender. For a moment, I almost gave in. The weight of fighting alone against organized manipulation felt impossible to bear. Marcus sensed my hesitation and pressed his advantage. "Just think about it, Evangeline. Is winning this fight worth destroying our family forever?" But as I sat there, surrounded by people trying to gaslight me into accepting theft and fraud, I remembered something Margaret Patterson had said. "The only thing worse than being victimized by criminals is being abandoned by the people who should protect you." I wasn't going to abandon my father, even if everyone else did, and I wasn't going to let Marcus and Robert get away with their crimes just because they'd successfully intimidated my allies. "I need time to consider your offer," I said carefully, buying myself space to regroup. What I didn't tell anyone in that room was that I had one final card to play. Evidence so damaging that even Kellerman's blackmail tactics couldn't neutralize it. The question was whether I'd have the courage to use it, knowing it would probably end my relationship with my family forever. That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing every piece of evidence we'd gathered, looking for something Marcus and his attorney couldn't explain away or discredit. Most of our documentation was strong but circumstantial. Forged signatures could be dismissed as misunderstandings. Financial transfers could be portrayed as legitimate loans, and witness testimony had been systematically undermined through blackmail. But there was one piece of evidence I hadn't shared with anyone yet, not even Janet Morrison. 6 months earlier, I'd installed security cameras in the office after a break-in at a neighboring business. The cameras were discreet and recorded continuously with footage automatically backed up to a cloud storage system that only I controlled. I'd forgotten about the recordings until now, but suddenly realized they might have captured Marcus and Uncle Robert's planning sessions. I spent hours reviewing footage from the weeks leading up to Dad's signature on the ownership transfer documents. What I found was even more damning than I'd hoped. On February 15th, 2 weeks before Dad signed the first ownership transfer, the cameras recorded a 40-minute meeting between Marcus' Uncle Robert and David Kellerman in our conference room. The audio quality was excellent, and their conversation was devastating. "The key is making him think these are routine business documents," Kellerman explained on the recording. "If we present everything together with legitimate paperwork, insurance forms, tax documents, vendor agreements, he won't scrutinize the ownership transfers closely." Marcus's voice was clearly audible. "Dad trusts me completely, and he hates reading legal paperwork. As long as I tell him it's standard administrative stuff, he'll sign whatever I put in front of him." Uncle Robert added, "We need to time this carefully. Evangeline usually reviews anything significant, so we have to handle this when she's not around. Maybe during her business trip to Seattle next month." But the most damaging part came when Kellerman outlined their long-term strategy. "Once you have legal ownership, Evangeline becomes just another employee. If she objects to your decisions, you can fire her. If she tries to investigate the transfers after the fact, you can claim she's a disgruntled former worker making false accusations." The recording proved premeditation conspiracy and deliberate intent to defraud. This wasn't misunderstanding or family miscommunication. This was calculated criminal activity planned by an attorney who should have known better. But I still needed help presenting this evidence effectively, and all my previous allies had been compromised or intimidated. That's when I received an unexpected phone call from someone I'd never met. "Miss Evangeline Whitmore." My name is Catherine Singh, and I'm an investigative journalist with Portland Business Weekly. I've been following your family's legal situation, and I believe there's a story here that the public needs to know about. Catherine explained that she'd been investigating elder fraud cases across Oregon and had noticed disturbing patterns involving attorneys who specialized in family business transitions. David Kellerman's name had appeared in 3 other cases where elderly business owners had transferred assets under questionable circumstances. "What makes your case particularly important," Catherine said, "is the sophistication of the scheme and the involvement of a licensed attorney. If Kellerman is helping clients systematically defraud their own family members, that's a story with statewide implications." Catherine had resources I didn't access to court records from other cases, connections with regulatory agencies that oversee attorney conduct, and most importantly, the ability to publish information that Marcus couldn't suppress through legal threats. When I played the security camera recordings for Catherine, her reaction was immediate. "This is smoking gun evidence. With this recording, you can prove conspiracy, premeditation, and attorney misconduct. But more importantly, you can protect other families from becoming victims of the same scheme." Catherine also brought news that changed everything. The Oregon State Bar Association was already investigating David Kellerman based on complaints from 2 other families in similar situations. My case could provide the evidence needed to suspend his license and refer him for criminal prosecution. Working with Catherine, I developed a comprehensive strategy, that Marcus couldn't anticipate or counter. Instead of relying on allies he could intimidate, I was going public with evidence he couldn't discredit. Catherine's first article, published online and in print, laid out the entire scheme with documentation and expert commentary from legal ethics specialists. The headline read, "Local Attorney Accused of Helping Clients Defraud Elderly Family Members." The story included quotes from the security camera recordings and analysis from prosecutors who specialized in elder fraud cases. The public exposure had immediate consequences. The Oregon State Bar expedited their investigation and announced that Kellerman was suspended from practice pending a full hearing. The district attorney's office assigned a senior prosecutor to our case and issued arrest warrants for Marcus and Uncle Robert. More importantly, 3 other families came forward with similar stories involving Kellerman's business transition services. The pattern of abuse was so clear that the Attorney General's office announced a statewide investigation into elder fraud in family business contexts. But the most satisfying development came when Maria Rodriguez called me the day after Catherine's article was published. "Evangeline, I owe you an apology," Maria said. "After reading about Kellerman's other cases, I realized that his threats were probably empty. He was counting on me being too scared to call his bluff." Maria had consulted with her own attorney about the tax issues Kellerman had discovered. Her lawyer assured her that the problems were minor and easily resolved through amended returns and penalty payments. Kellerman had deliberately exaggerated the consequences to make his threats seem more serious than they actually were. "I'm ready to give my testimony now," Maria said, "and I've talked to the other clients who were approached by Marcus. We're all willing to go on record about his deceptive practices." Margaret Patterson called with similar news. Her attorney had reviewed the documentation Kellerman claimed to have about her past, and most of it was either irrelevant or protected by medical privacy laws. Detective Park was reassigned back to our case when her supervisor realized the conflict of interest concerns were based on false information Kellerman had provided. Marcus had overplayed his hand. By threatening too many people with too little real leverage, he'd created a situation where victims started comparing notes and realizing they were being manipulated. The security camera recordings, combined with Catherine's investigative reporting and the renewed support from our original allies, created an overwhelming case that no amount of legal maneuvering could overcome. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. Cornered and facing certain criminal prosecution, he was about to make one final, desperate move that would reveal just how far he was willing to go to avoid consequences for his actions. The end came faster than anyone expected. With the security camera recordings as undeniable evidence and multiple families coming forward with similar stories, the district attorney moved aggressively. Marcus and Uncle Robert were arrested on charges of elder fraud, embezzlement conspiracy, and forgery. David Kellerman faced additional charges for attorney misconduct and aiding criminal activity. The arrests made front-page news in Portland Business Weekly, and Catherine Singh's follow-up articles sparked statewide discussions about protecting elderly business owners from family exploitation. The Oregon State Bar Association used our case as the foundation for new guidelines requiring enhanced documentation and independent review for any ownership transfers involving clients over 65. But the most satisfying moment came during Marcus's arraignment hearing. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of federal charges if the case went to trial, he accepted a plea agreement that required full restitution, 3 years in prison, and permanent disqualification from any management role in the family business. Uncle Robert, whose financial desperation had motivated much of the scheme, received a harsher sentence because of his role in planning the fraud. His ex-wife Margaret testified about his history of financial manipulation, and the judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison plus complete forfeiture of any claims to company assets. David Kellerman lost his law license permanently and faced separate federal charges for operating what prosecutors called a systematic elder fraud enterprise. The investigation Catherine initiated ultimately led to charges against 12 attorneys across 3 states who had used similar tactics to help clients defraud elderly family members. The financial recovery exceeded our expectations. Not only were all stolen funds returned with interest, but the civil lawsuit resulted in additional damages that more than compensated for the legal expenses and business disruption. The court also ordered Marcus to transfer his fraudulent ownership shares back to Dad, restoring complete family control of the company. Perhaps, most importantly, Dad's reputation was not only restored, but enhanced. The business community recognized him as a victim of sophisticated fraud, rather than someone whose judgment was failing. Several major clients specifically praised his integrity in fighting back against family members who had betrayed his trust. The emotional healing took longer than the legal resolution. Dad struggled with the reality that his son had been willing to steal from him and manipulate him, but therapy helped him understand that Marcus's choices reflected character flaws that had nothing to do with Dad's parenting or judgment. Mom emerged as an unexpected source of strength throughout the ordeal. Her quiet support during the family meeting had been the first crack in Marcus's facade, and her willingness to testify against her own son demonstrated moral courage that impressed everyone involved in the case. As for me, the experience fundamentally changed how I viewed family loyalty and business relationships. Real loyalty means protecting people from harm, even when that harm comes from within the family. Enabling destructive behavior isn't love, it's cowardice disguised as peacekeeping. The company not only survived, but thrived after the crisis. Without Marcus's interference and Uncle Robert's schemes, we were able to focus on legitimate growth opportunities. Dad gradually transitioned more responsibilities to me, but based on mutual respect and careful planning, rather than manipulation and fraud. Maria Rodriguez became more than a client. She became a close friend and eventually a business partner in several joint ventures. Her courage in ultimately standing up to Kellerman's threats inspired other small business owners to report similar intimidation tactics. Catherine Singh won a statewide journalism award for her investigation into elder fraud schemes. Her work led to legislative changes that strengthened protections for elderly business owners and increased penalties for attorneys who facilitate family fraud. Detective Park used our case as the foundation for specialized training programs that help law enforcement officers recognize sophisticated family fraud schemes. The patterns she identified in our situation have been used to solve dozens of similar cases across the Pacific Northwest. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the relationships I built with other families who had survived similar betrayals. We formed an informal support network that helps people navigate the complex emotions of being victimized by family members while also seeking justice through the legal system. The experience taught me that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoring balance and protecting future victims. Marcus and Uncle Robert faced consequences that matched their crimes, but equally importantly, their scheme was exposed in ways that prevent other families from suffering the same betrayal. Looking back, I'm grateful for that 3 a.m. text message that started this whole nightmare. Without it, Marcus and Uncle Robert might have successfully stolen everything Dad worked to build, and other families would have continued falling victim to similar schemes. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most important victories. My family was stronger, my community was safer, and justice was served in ways that created lasting positive change. Now I want to hear from you about this incredible journey of family betrayal and ultimate justice. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How do you think karma works in real family situations like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because your perspectives always help me process these intense experiences. If this story of standing up to family fraud resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who might be facing similar challenges. And definitely subscribe for more real-life stories about justice karma and the complex dynamics of family relationships. Thank you for being part of this community that believes in holding people accountable regardless of blood relations. Remember, sometimes the family you choose through shared values is stronger than the family you inherit through genetics. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that family loyalty means accepting criminal behavior.